David Hayes stared at the cracked wall of his underground bunker, watching dust particles float through the thin beam of artificial light. He had been alone on this planet for 37 years. 37 years of silence, broken only by the humming of dying machines. The wall in front of him was covered with markings, scratches he had made to count the days, the months, the years. Most of the markings had faded now, worn away by time and his own trembling hands. He was 58 years old, though he looked much older. His hair was completely white, his skin weathered and thin like old paper. His hands shook sometimes without reason. The isolation had changed him in ways he could not explain even to himself. He had forgotten what it felt like to have a conversation with another human being. He had forgotten the sound of genuine laughter. He had forgotten so many things about the world he came from. The bunker was his entire universe. It was a small space carved deep into the red stone of Kepler 442b, approximately 30 meters below the planet's toxic surface. The walls were reinforced with metal plating that had once been shiny and new. Now they were covered with rust and dark stains from water leaks that he could never quite fix completely. The ceiling was low, forcing him to duck his head when he walked through the narrow corridors. 3 small rooms made up his home. A sleeping area with a thin mattress that had lost all comfort decades ago. A small kitchen where he prepared his recycled food. And the main control room where he spent most of his time, staring at machines that slowly died. When the colony ship had crashed, David was working in the agricultural section. He had been a botanist, trained to help establish food production systems on the New World. The crash had happened so quickly that he barely had time to understand what was happening. The ship's navigation systems had failed as it entered the atmosphere. The pilots tried to correct the descent, but the planet's strange magnetic fields interfered with their instruments. The ship hit the ground hard, breaking into 3 pieces. Most of the colonists died in the initial impact. The others, those who survived the crash, made it to the emergency shelters. But the planet was not what they had expected. It was not hospitable. It was not even remotely suitable for human life. The atmosphere was filled with corrosive chemicals. The soil was poisonous. The weather was violent and unpredictable. Storms with winds that could tear a person apart came without warning. Temperatures dropped to deadly levels at night. The sun provided almost no heat. In the end, every other colonist had either perished in accidents or succumbed to illness. David alone had survived, protected by his bunker, sustained by recycled water and synthesized food. Alone. His water recycling system was failing. This was the real crisis now, the final countdown to his death. He had repaired it many times over the years, replacing worn seals, cleaning clogged filters and rewiring broken circuits. But machines wear out. They break down. They die. Just like people. The recycler's efficiency had dropped to 60%. Where it once provided pure, clean water, now it was producing liquid that tasted of metal and chemicals. His throat burned when he drank it. His stomach hurt constantly. But he drank it anyway because the alternative was dying of thirst. He had calculated that he had approximately 3 months of drinkable water remaining. 3 months. After 37 years of survival, he would die not in some dramatic way, but slowly and painfully, his body drying out as his machines failed him. He had accepted this fate. He had made peace with it. Death was not the enemy anymore. Loneliness was. The endless, crushing, suffocating loneliness that had worn away at his mind like water wearing away stone. He talked to himself constantly, narrating his days, describing his thoughts out loud just to hear a human voice, even if it was only his own. The control room was filled with old equipment. Some of it still worked. Most of it did not. There was a communications console that had been dead for 15 years. David had stopped checking it long ago. It was a relic of false hope, a reminder of the outside world that he could never reach. There was a scanner that occasionally picked up storms approaching from the distance. There were atmospheric monitors that tracked the planet's deadly chemistry. And there were the old mission logs stored in data files that David read over and over again. He knew them by heart now. He could recite them in his sleep. On this particular morning, something made David reach out and press the activation sequence on the old communications console. He did not know why. It was habit, perhaps. Or maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the voice inside his head, the part of him that had never fully accepted isolation, begging him to try one more time. The console's ancient screen flickered as it came to life. Dust particles disturbed by the electrical current danced in the air around it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen filled with text. A signal. A real active signal. Mathematical. Precise. Repeating. David's hand trembled as he listened. After 37 years of silence, the console was receiving a message. Not from Earth. Not from any human source. But from somewhere on this planet. Somewhere out there, beyond the toxic winds and the deadly cold, beyond the hostile landscape that had tried to kill him so many times, something or someone was sending a signal. David heard it play again and again. A pattern that repeated every few seconds. A distress beacon. Someone else was on Kepler 442b. After all these years, he was no longer completely alone. The thought was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. David knew what he had to do. He had to find them. David sat motionless in front of the communications console, listening to the signal repeat over and over again. His heart was beating so fast that he thought it might burst from his chest. The mathematical pattern was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It was not the emergency beacon that human ships used. It was something different, something alien. But it was definitely a distress signal. Someone or something was calling for help. He played the signal through the audio system again, listening carefully to every sound. The pattern repeated every 8 seconds. There were 3 distinct tones, each one slightly different in pitch. The first tone was high and sharp. The second was lower and steady. The third was a double pulse like a heartbeat. Together, they created a rhythm that seemed almost alive. David found himself counting along with it, letting the pattern fill his mind. High-low pulse, high-low pulse, over and over again. The location display on the console showed coordinates for the signal's origin. It was coming from the northern continent, almost 2,000 kilometers away from his bunker. 2,000 kilometers across a landscape that was more hostile than anything David had experienced in his 37 years of survival. There were massive mountain ranges up there, according to the old mapping data. There were valleys filled with toxic gases that could dissolve human flesh. There were storms that appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. The journey would be nearly impossible. But it was also his only chance at finding another living being. David stood up from his chair and walked slowly through the bunker, his mind racing with possibilities. What if the signal was a malfunction? What if some old piece of equipment from the crashed colony ship was still transmitting? What if he walked across that entire wasteland for nothing, only to collapse and die in the middle of nowhere? These thoughts circled in his head like vultures. But there was another thought, stronger than all the others. What if it was real? What if there were actually other people alive on this planet? He made his way to the storage vault, a sealed room at the back of the bunker where the colony had stored emergency equipment. He had not opened this room in many years. The door was heavy and rusted, and it took all his strength to pull it open. Inside, the air was stale and smelled like old metal. Dust covered everything. But the equipment was still there, preserved in the sealed chamber. Emergency suits designed for extended planetary exploration. Backpacks with built-in water filtration systems. Communication devices. Food rations. Everything a person would need to survive in the hostile environment outside. David selected one of the emergency suits and carried it back to the main room. The material had degraded slightly over the decades, but it was still intact. He tested the seals carefully, checking for tears or weak points. The suit held air pressure without leaking. The power cells, though old, still held a charge. He connected the suit to his main power supply and let it charge for several hours. As the battery indicator slowly filled with green light, David began to feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. He prepared a backpack with supplies he could afford to take. Water containers filled from his recycler. Dried food rations from the emergency stores. A small handheld communication device that still had some power left in its batteries. Maps of the region, printed on old paper and marked with the routes that human explorers had planned but never traveled. Medical supplies. A cutting tool. A rope. Everything he could think of that might be useful. He packed the backpack carefully, weighing each item against its importance and the burden it would add to his journey. As David prepared, he found himself thinking about his life before the crash. He thought about his wife, Emma, who had stayed on Earth. She was probably dead now. 37 years had passed. Emma would have been in her 80s by now or already gone. His children, if they had any, would be adults. They would have lived entire lives without him. The world he knew had moved on. Everyone he had cared about was certainly gone. This thought should have made him sad, but instead it made him feel lighter. There was nothing holding him to the past anymore. The future was whatever awaited him across that wasteland. He worked through the night, preparing everything he would need. He tested the suit's air filters. He checked the water recycling systems on the backpack. He made sure the communication device was properly calibrated to follow the signal. As the dim orange sun of Kepler 442b began to rise on the horizon, painting the dark sky with shades of rust and brown, David realized that he had made a decision. He was going to leave the bunker. He was going to walk across 2,000 kilometers of hostile terrain. He might die. Probably he would die. But he might also find someone else alive. That possibility was worth dying for. Before he sealed the bunker behind him, David walked through each room one last time. He looked at the marks on the wall that he had made to count the days. 37 years of isolation. 37 years of talking to himself and machines. 37 years of waiting for something to change. Now something was changing. The signal continued to pulse from the communications console, steady and constant and absolutely real. It was calling to him. It was pulling him toward something. Toward the unknown. Toward hope. And David was finally ready to answer. David stepped out of the bunker and onto the surface of Kepler 442b for the first time in 15 years. The emergency suit enclosed his entire body, protecting him from the toxic atmosphere. The visor on his helmet was scratched and cloudy, but he could see through it well enough. The landscape stretched out before him in every direction, a vast wasteland of red rock and dark sand. The dim orange sun cast long shadows across the ground. Everything looked dead. Everything looked lonely. He activated the suit's navigation system and set it to follow the signal's coordinates. The device showed him the direction he needed to travel. North. Toward the distant mountains that he could barely see through the hazy atmosphere. The distance counter displayed the number that made his chest tighten. 1,987 kilometers. Almost 2,000 kilometers of walking through a hostile world. He took a deep breath, checked his backpack one more time and began walking. The first 3 days were harder than David expected. His body had grown soft from decades of living in the bunker. His legs hurt. His feet ached inside the suit's boots. His breathing was loud in his own ears, amplified by the suit's audio system. He could hear every breath, every heartbeat, every small movement he made. The silence of the world around him made the noise of his own body feel overwhelming. He walked during the day when the sun provided a little light and rested at night, huddled behind rocks, conserving his suit's power. On the third day, the first sandstorm appeared on the horizon. David saw it coming from far away, a massive wall of sand and dust rolling toward him like a living thing. The wind picked up suddenly, hitting him with such force that he was knocked backward. He struggled to stay on his feet, leaning into the wind, covering his visor with his hands to protect it from the abrasive sand particles. The storm lasted for 6 hours. 6 hours of being battered and pushed around by winds strong enough to tear a person apart. David found shelter behind a large rock formation and waited for the storm to pass, his heart pounding in his chest. When the storm finally ended, David's suit was covered with scratches. The visor was more cloudy now, harder to see through. But the suit's integrity had held. He was still alive. He continued walking, pushing forward despite his exhaustion. The signal continued to pulse in his ears, steady and constant. High-low pulse. High-low pulse. It became like a heartbeat to him, a sign that he was moving in the right direction, that something real was waiting for him out there. By the 8th day, David's water supply was running low. He was drinking more than he had calculated. His body was burning through fluids faster than the suit's recycling system could handle. He rationed his water carefully, allowing himself only small sips when his throat became unbearably dry. His lips cracked. His mouth felt like leather. The food rations were not enough to satisfy his hunger, but they gave him energy to continue walking. He stopped thinking about comfort. He stopped thinking about anything except moving forward, one step at a time. On the 12th day, the ground beneath David's feet began to shake. Subsurface tremors rippled through the red rock, like waves moving through water. The old mapping data had said nothing about seismic activity. David stumbled, nearly falling as the ground shifted beneath him. A massive chasm suddenly opened 50 meters to his left, splitting the earth apart with a sound like thunder. David's heart nearly stopped. If he had been walking 50 meters to the left, he would have fallen into that hole and died. He carefully navigated around the chasm, checking his path carefully before taking each step. The tremors continued for 3 days. David lived in constant fear that the ground beneath him would open up and swallow him. He moved more slowly, testing each piece of ground before putting his full weight on it. The stress of walking on unstable terrain wore him down mentally as well as physically. He began to have doubts. Maybe he was walking toward his own death. Maybe the signal was leading him into a trap. On the 15th day, his suit's cooling system failed. The active thermal regulation stopped working. Without the cooling, David's body temperature began rising rapidly. He removed layers of clothing beneath the suit, but it was not enough. The heat became unbearable. Every movement felt like wading through fire. Sweat poured down his face, making his vision blurry. His head started to hurt. His thoughts became confused and unclear. He saw mirages on the horizon. Vast oceans that were not really there. Rescue ships descending from the sky. His wife Emma standing in front of him, waving. His children smiling at him. David knew they were not real. His mind was breaking. The isolation and the stress were finally taking their toll. On the 17th day, David collapsed. His legs simply stopped working. He fell to the ground hard, the impact forcing the air from his lungs. He tried to stand up, but his body refused to obey. His water was gone. His suit's power was below 20%. The signal was much stronger now. It had to be close. He could hear it clearly even through his confusion. High low pulse. High low pulse. But he could not move. He lay on his back on the red sand, staring up at the orange sky through his scratched visor. Then something happened. The sun was blocked. A shadow fell across David's body. Something massive moved above him, blocking out the light. David's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. Through the haze of his confusion and dehydration, he saw a shape descending. A shape that did not belong on this dead world. A shape that meant he was no longer alone. David opened his eyes slowly. He could not remember falling asleep, but he must have. Everything was different now. The sky above him was not orange anymore. It was dark. Black. He was no longer on the surface of Kepler 442b. He was inside something. A ship. A massive ship that moved silently through space. His body was no longer covered in the emergency suit. He was lying on a soft bed in a room with white walls and bright lights. Medical equipment surrounded him, making soft beeping sounds. Tubes were connected to his arms, feeding him liquids that tasted like nothing he had ever experienced before. His body felt heavy and weak, but also clean. Someone had washed him. Someone had taken care of him. The realization made tears form in his eyes. A door at the end of the room slid open. A figure entered. David's breath caught in his throat. The being was not human. It was tall, almost 2 meters high, with a body covered in what looked like iridescent scales that shifted between blue and green colors. Its head was elongated, with large compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. It had 4 arms instead of 2. When it moved, its movements were fluid and graceful, like water flowing. But despite its alien appearance, there was something about it that felt peaceful. Not threatening. Kind even. The being approached the bed slowly, moving in a way that seemed designed not to frighten David. It made soft sounds like musical notes, that the room's speakers translated into words. The voice was calm and gentle. It said, "Welcome. You are safe now. You are aboard the Verdant Collective research vessel. My name is Keeper 7. I am a biologist. You have been in medical stasis for 3 days." David tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Keeper 7 seemed to understand. The alien moved to a table beside the bed and retrieved a container of water. The water was clear and cold and tasted perfect. David drank it all, grateful beyond words. When he finished, he tried to speak again. "Where am I?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears, hoarse from disuse. "You are aboard the Verdant Collective ship," Keeper 7 said. "We are a spacefaring species dedicated to discovering and preserving intelligent life throughout the galaxy. We have been observing your planet for some time. When we detected your life signs and your attempt to reach the signal, we decided to make contact. You are the first human we have encountered in this sector of space in over 100 years." David's mind struggled to process what was happening. "How did you find me?" he asked. "We have been monitoring the distress beacon from the crashed colony ship for decades," Keeper 7 explained. "When we discovered you were still alive, we sent the signal to draw you out of your underground shelter. We wanted to see if you would attempt a journey across the hostile surface. We were very interested in studying human resilience and determination. Your survival for 37 years alone on a planet this hostile is remarkable. It is something that most intelligent species could never accomplish." David felt a mix of emotions. Relief. Confusion. A sense of betrayal that they had manipulated him into leaving his bunker. But also gratitude. They had saved his life. "What happens to me now?" he asked. "That is your choice," Keeper 7 said. "We have several options to offer you. You may remain aboard this vessel and continue your recovery. We have advanced medical technology that can heal the damage that years of isolation have caused to your body and mind. You may study our database of recovered species and their cultures. You may learn about the universe beyond your small bunker. Or if you wish, we can transport you to the nearest human colony. There are many human settlements now, scattered across 3 different galactic sectors. Humanity has spread across the stars in your absence. You would not recognize your species anymore. David could hardly believe what he was hearing. Other humans. Colonies. The idea that humanity had not ended with the crash of his colony ship was almost too much to comprehend. There are other humans alive? He asked. Many, Keeper 7 confirmed. Your species has adapted well to life among the stars. You have become traders, explorers, scientists, and artists. You have formed alliances with many different species. Your resilience and adaptability are valued throughout the galaxy. The story of your survival here on Kepler 442b will be of great interest to your people. Over the next few days, David explored the ship. It was enormous, with corridors that stretched for what seemed like kilometers. He saw laboratories where verdant scientists studied samples from hundreds of different planets. He saw a library filled with information about thousands of different species. He saw navigation charts showing trade routes that connected distant corners of the galaxy. The universe was so much larger and more complex than anything he had ever imagined. He learned more about the Verdant Collective. They were peaceful explorers who traveled the galaxy seeking out intelligent life and creating a vast archive of knowledge. They did not engage in conflict or warfare. They simply observed, learned, and preserved. They had already saved records of over 15,000 different species. Some were extinct. Some were thriving. But all of them were remembered. All of them were preserved in the Verdant's vast database. Keeper 7 spent many hours talking with David, asking about his life on Kepler 442b, about Earth, about human culture and history. David found himself sharing things he had not thought about in decades. He talked about his wife Emma. He talked about his work as a botanist. He talked about his dreams of establishing new life on a new world. Keeper 7 listened patiently to every word, recording everything in the ship's database. One day, Keeper 7 brought David to the observation deck. From there, David could see the vast expanse of space. Stars stretched out in every direction, countless and infinite. Kepler 442b was visible below, a small orange sphere floating in the darkness. David realized that he was no longer alone. He was not just saved. He was part of something much larger than himself. David stood at the observation window of the Verdant Collective ship, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. 3 weeks had passed since his rescue. 3 weeks of recovery, learning, and adjustment to a world that was so different from anything he had experienced in his 37 years of isolation. His body had healed remarkably well. The medical technology aboard the ship was far beyond anything humans had ever developed. His muscles had regained their strength. His skin had become smooth again. His mind felt clearer than it had in years. Keeper 7 entered the observation room quietly, moving with that same graceful motion that David had grown accustomed to. The alien biologist held a data device in one of its 4 hands. I have completed the full analysis of your medical and psychological condition, Keeper 7 said. You are healthy now, David. Physically and mentally. The isolation has left some marks on your mind, but nothing that cannot be healed with time and proper support. David nodded slowly. He had been expecting this conversation. During his recovery, Keeper 7 had explained that the Verdant Collective had several options for him. He could remain on the ship and continue his studies. He could be transported to one of the human colonies. Or he could join the Verdant on their expeditions across the galaxy, helping them to document and preserve human culture and history. Each option represented a completely different future. David had spent the past 3 weeks thinking about which path he should take. I have also been analyzing the historical records of your species, Keeper 7 continued. The data is fascinating. Humans have accomplished remarkable things in the time since your colony crashed. You have built cities on 17 different planets. You have formed trading partnerships with over 40 different alien species. You have created art, music, and literature that rivals any other intelligent species in the known galaxy. Your people have become something far greater than what they were when you left Earth. Can I see them? David asked. Can I see the records of what humans have become? Keeper 7 gestured toward a screen on the wall. Immediately, images began to appear. Cities of glass and metal on distant worlds. Human colonists working alongside aliens, building something new together. Marketplaces filled with traders from hundreds of different species. Humans in space suits exploring new planets. Humans sitting in concert halls listening to music performed by beings from other worlds. Humans studying science, creating art, falling in love, building families, living lives that were rich and full and connected to something larger than themselves. David felt tears running down his face as he watched. These were his people. This was humanity's future. A future that had happened without him. A future that he had missed because he had been trapped on a dead world, surviving day after day in complete isolation. The emotion was almost overwhelming. "There is something else I must tell you," Keeper 7 said. "Your story, the story of your survival on Kepler 442b, has become known among my people. We have shared it with some of the human colonies as well. It has inspired great interest and admiration. A single human, surviving alone for 37 years on a hostile planet, refusing to surrender to despair or loneliness. This is a powerful story. This is a story that speaks to something very important about your species." "What do you mean?" David asked. "Your species has a quality that we do not often see among intelligent beings," Keeper 7 explained. "You call it resilience. The ability to endure suffering and continue forward. The refusal to accept defeat even when all hope seems gone. Most species, when faced with the conditions you endured, would have given up. They would have ended their lives. But you did not. You survived. You kept searching for life. You kept hoping that someday you would find another living being. This quality is rare and precious." Keeper 7 moved closer to the observation window, looking out at the stars. "The Verdant Collective is planning an expedition to make contact with isolated human colonies that we have discovered in remote regions of space. These colonies have lost connection with the main human civilization. They do not know what has become of humanity in the wider galaxy. They do not know that they are not alone. We are asking if you would join us on this expedition. We want you to tell your story to these isolated humans. We want you to help them understand that they are part of something larger. That humanity has spread across the stars. That there is hope and possibility beyond their small worlds." David turned away from the window to face Keeper 7 directly. "You're asking me to become like you?" he said. "An explorer? A preservationist? Someone who travels the galaxy documenting life?" "Yes," Keeper 7 said simply. "If you choose to accept. Your survival story makes you uniquely qualified for this work. You understand isolation. You understand desperation. You understand the power of hope. These are things that isolated colonies need to hear about. They need to meet someone who has survived what you have survived." David thought about the options laid out before him. He could go to one of the main human colonies. He could reunite with his species and live a comfortable life surrounded by other humans. That would be the easy choice, the safe choice. Or he could join the Verdant on their expeditions. He could spend the rest of his life traveling through space, meeting new species, telling his story, helping other isolated humans understand that they were not truly alone. That choice would be harder. It would be lonely in different ways. But it would also be meaningful. "How long would the expedition last?" David asked. "Perhaps 10 years, Keeper 7 said. "Perhaps longer. It is difficult to say. The galaxy is vast. There is much to discover and document." David looked back out at the stars. He thought about his 37 years in the bunker. He thought about the journey across the wasteland. He thought about how fear and hope had pushed him forward when everything seemed impossible. He thought about how his survival had meaning now, not just as an end in itself, but as a story that could inspire others. "I'll do it," David said. "I'll join the expedition. I want to help other humans understand that isolation is not the end. That there is always hope. That the universe is larger and stranger and more wonderful than we ever dreamed." Keeper 7 made soft musical sounds that the translator converted into words. "Excellent. Your journey has only just begun, David Hayes. Across the vast emptiness of space, there are countless stories waiting to be told. And you will help tell them." David turned back to the observation window. The orange sun of Kepler 442b was no longer visible. It had fallen behind them as the ship moved through space. Ahead, countless stars waited. Countless worlds. Countless possibilities. For the first time since leaving his bunker, David smiled with genuine peace in his heart. His lonely vigil had ended. His true mission was just beginning.